Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library, and today I have another exciting guest on, Danielle Graham, and I'm excited about this one because she is one of the founders of the Sandpiper Ventures, which is one of the first all women-led venture capital fund in Canada. So welcome to the show, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reaching out and for having me. It's exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, when people hear about venture capital funds, I think people have their own, I guess, idea of what that means or what that entails. So can you give us an idea of when you think about, Sandpiper, how do you describe it to other people?
It's a great question. There is a lot of educational process around where venture capital plays in the market because there are a lot of elements that cannot be defined as clearly as metrics. If you define them by metrics, you may not find the disruptive technologies that could lead them to, the next unicorn. And so for me, I'm looking at early stage, seed stage companies. The terminology changes all the time, but essentially that means they've hit some level of product market growth, they have an opportunity to scale, they're on that path, the founder is motivated and they're mission driven towards that path, and there's a core technology base that enables ownership of IP and growth of that IP throughout an entire large scale market.
Gotcha. Now, what was it about, the venture capital space that inspired you to say, you know what, I want to found an organization in this space?
I started as a founder. I had a water purification device that put less water to sewage. It was at a 97% recovery rate with reverse osmosis and UV filtration. And so I was working on that in Waterloo, and I was the only woman who was receiving funding, who was in a lot of the spaces I was working within the tech sector. And so that really galvanized me to say, where are all the other women? Why am I the only one here? How is it this segregated? And so I started the first female-focused tech accelerator in Canada called Fierce Founders about 6 years ago, with the support of Google and Deloitte and a few others who then continued to support it, and it still exists today. And the big piece was there were tons of women who were working on tech and incredible businesses who weren't engaging the tech ecosystem because they didn't feel like it was for them. And so a lot is about positioning and language. And so as I worked on that, I felt more mission driven around supporting other women, but I also felt that it was so much more interesting for me to be involved in a bunch of businesses and to see which ones are high potential and how I can support them. And so I felt like being able to access funding for women was such a critical piece to the puzzle of why there were so few women getting venture funding. Women weren't on the decision-making table of these venture funds. And my particular skill set, I felt like venture capital was the best intersection for impact as well as performance. So I was excited that I was able to work in this space, to get the opportunities that I have, and I want to enable more women to get those opportunities as well.
Awesome. And now you mentioned a lot that I think, we got to take a step back to. So I didn't realize how amazing your background was. So let's take a little step back. Now, the filtration business. Now, you said you guys were getting was it a 96%?
97% recovery.
97%. So how did you even find yourself going into a filtration business? Where did that come from for you?
So, water for me was the biggest issue. And I mentioned to you earlier, Canadians are number one in the world for water tech. And we have the most clear fresh water in the world, just through access to, our lakes and our glaciers. And so for me, I was building out, a team because I wanted to work in entrepreneurship. And I worked with the VP at Bruce Power, who had access to a significant pile of, deep tech IP-based water purification devices. And so we went through all of that and we found one we felt we could commercialize, and we worked directly with the inventor of that technology. And we're talking a real basement scientist here, like the, and so we built this out over 4.5 years, and I eventually sold my shares, but it is something that like applies that level of filtration that when I was going to the municipalities, they didn't believe that we'd actually achieve that. And so we did a lot around commercializing that product for home use systems. And fundamentally, it was more like a nice to have for a lot of individuals than a need to have. If they put water to sewage, and conventional systems are putting about 50% of water to sewage, if they put that water to sewage, they're not at a point where they're actually, getting charged for, or there's no problems directly to the individual. While as certain entities that are putting that water to sewage will be charged for that, and then there's a business cost, an incentive to utilizing a system like ours. So where we actually ended up finding traction was it was like so random, like this product market fit validation of chicken farms. And as the cannabis industry grew, there was a lot of value in kind of like less access to water. And then also in New Jersey, where they charge for the water you put to sewage from an environmental standpoint because of access. So we were able to build out a lot of systems in those spaces.
Wow, that is impressive. So now it makes it even more impressive that, now you're in the VC space, but you've already gone through, the journey of actually building a business. So you actually know what it's like to go through the process of building a business, getting customers, and actually managing a business for growth. So now let's jump back to the VC. Now, and I know you guys might have a lot of deals in the pipeline, and you may not be able to tell us exactly like the companies, but what are the nature of the types of companies that you guys look at from your VC firm?
Great question. We're all based in the Atlantic provinces, so there's definitely an opportunity to build out that ecosystem. There have been big plays and big opportunities coming out, and on a per capita basis, it's definitely hitting above its weight. And so what I'm seeing is the deeper technologies coming out of the universities that need more support for commercialization in a very similar way that I built my company. And on top of it, so there's that kind of flux of these deep STEM expertise and business expertise, and bringing that together in an effective way is something that, particularly Kitchener-Waterloo, which is known as a major tech center with top talent that's recruited across the world. There's a lot of that in the East Coast as well. That's even more underestimated, and therefore there's more opportunity. And so I'm excited about those types of technologies, but I'm also seeing a lot of companies that are looking for Atlantic expansion, and our team can help with that. So we only want to invest in and work with companies that we can support in a realistic way. And so those are the places where we play.
Gotcha. Now, one of the things that comes up with a lot of different entrepreneurs or different companies as they're looking at, hey, they want to raise funds. And one of the questions that I get, because my background is as a certified public accountant in corporate finance with startups. So one of the questions they ask me are like, what are the types of things that, a VC looks for when they're trying to see, hey, is this a company we want to, partner with to help them grow and expand?
So in terms of the early stage metrics, or overall, if you're looking at kind of a business,
I would say, let's start with overall.
Overall, there's the kind of cliche pieces that are, serial entrepreneur, certain universities, like those check boxes that people put people in. For me, it's much more about the individual talent. So when I've done boot camps and accelerators, what I've seen is the most successful people are the ones who work the hardest, highest IQ, highest EQ. You can see that in people's drive as you work with them, even throughout the course of, say, a 6-week boot camp. A few interviews will not do justice. People can charm you and you think you're amazing, and then they don't do anything in terms of execution. So for me, it's much more about, is this someone who is capable of executing? wants to execute and can bring everyone that they need in terms of support along with them for the ride? Is this a true leader? Because entrepreneurship is extremely challenging. It's not for everyone. You do have to be kind of your own boss, your own entity, and you have to be able to galvanize people around you. Otherwise, your company will be as limited as your perspective on it. And so I really look for top tier founders who haven't necessarily done it already, right? Like, tried and true, de-risk, serial entrepreneur, great. But if you can find those diamonds in the rough and then figure out who to support throughout the system, those are the ones who are going to show you the highest return. You can support someone with a small vision and you're not going to get anywhere, and you're just helping that one individual. But if you help a top founder, suddenly they're hiring 20 people and they're impacting everyone around them in a positive way that I want to be part of. That's the journey I want to be part of.
Awesome. And I think that becomes a very different approach from what I hear when I talk with different VC firms or even with private equity firms, where you hear a firm like yours where they talk about, the impact that they want to have with the company, not so much just, hey, I want to make more money, that's why I'm looking for these investments. They're looking at, hey, how do we make an impact with the companies that we're partnering with and with the companies that we're investing in?
Yeah, and I mean, with an all-woman founded team and a network of women executives and women entrepreneurs from across Canada, we have that opportunity to support women with women's mentorship, which unfortunately is very rare. Most of the women entrepreneurs that I know have cap tables that comprise entirely of men, and there's great sponsors, there's great support, but there's different connection and there's a different opportunity and there's different common experiences that can guide that journey as they grow. And once you've invested and you're on the cap table, you're in that journey with them. And hopefully the companies we invest in are very much the ones we can be more strategic with, because otherwise there won't be as much value add. So we're definitely focused on that.
Awesome. Now, where can people find you online or on social media to, follow the story of what's going on with Sandpiper and to see the different moves and the different impact that you guys are making?
So we definitely are pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn. And so we've also launched a new national initiative with women angel networks across Canada called Canada 51. And 51 represents the 51% of the population that women represent. And so we are the 51%, and we've been tokenized in terms of, representing 1 in 5 panelists, and truly not gaining a lot of the venture capital funding. Canadian data is very similar to US data on this type of underrepresentation, but we're also very focused on diversity as a whole, and the fact that women's representation may be at a certain point, or underrepresentation may be at a certain point, but also Black underrepresentation, Indigenous founders, refugee founders, people with disabilities or accessibility focused startups, and LGBTQ+. So we've been working with a number of founder programs, and we've been building those out as well. And so that's what this consortium is coming together to emphasize. So I would hope that people could look at the Canada51.ca website and see some of the founders' thought leadership on how they've been working in the time of COVID, as well as some future articles that we've got in the works.
Awesome. Now, before we wrap up, there's 2 questions that I like to ask all the guests that come on. The first question is, as you think about building out Sandpiper and when you think about what that journey's been like, what is one challenge that you kind of came up against that you were like, all right, we got to figure out how to work through this or work over this or work around this to continue, the success of what we're building?
I definitely think the VC journey is actually very similar to the entrepreneur journey. So, getting more exposure as I'm raising and building those networks, I'm recognizing that fundamentally, even though we've had an all women's venture capital team, where we're pitching to are all male teams as well. So it goes all the way up and down the chain. And so being able to look at where can we improve the decision making for the people who are making decisions about us as well, and how can we have that influence, and how can we manage those relationships when, you know, we're also dealing with being patronized, we're also dealing with those biases and those exclusionary practices that have meant venture capital is also extremely underrepresented in terms of the different demographics that comprise the country. So I definitely think the biggest challenge has been, you know, fundraising ourselves. And luckily we have the tie-ins and it's gaining momentum, but that's also something that has hindered a lot more of these initiatives and these funds from taking place. So there's a reason for this underrepresentation, and we're facing it directly.
Gotcha. And then the last question I like to ask is, you know, when you think about your journey, what's one tip that you've picked up that you would say, you know what, this is a tip that entrepreneurs should definitely keep in mind?
I would say something that I've learned over time and I've honed, and it's super valuable, it's sometimes underestimated, is the relationship building, is actually taking a few steps ahead, feeling comfortable with where you're at, and not underestimating the value that you bring to those conversations earlier on, especially with very perfectionist founders. They want to build their product, and they kind of operate in a silo for so long when the ecosystem exists to support them. And so feeling comfortable to build those relationships, even when you're not at a place where, you know, you're venture grade and you're going to be pitching for funding, you can still have a conversation. You can still tell people where you're at, and they can help you get there faster.
Gotcha. Now, Danielle, thank you so much for coming onto the show, for telling us, you know, about your journey, Sandpiper, and for sharing, you know, the wisdom and being transparent about, you know, like the challenges, because I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs and founders face. And sometimes they often feel like, you know, I'm the only one dealing with this, but when they can hear it from other people who've gone through those challenges and are figuring out a way to work through it, it's always inspiring and helpful. So thank you so much.
I'm glad you think that helps. I'm really interested in connecting with, you know, early stage women entrepreneurs who, you know, I mean, obviously mostly in the Atlantic provinces, but we've got a lot of activities going on, and just providing that access is something that I do all the time. So I'm really open to outreach.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as we've seen, like I said, our show has been growing more in Canada. So as we come across founders, we'll definitely mention your name and have them, like I said, check out Sandpiper to connect, because we appreciate the work you're doing and the impact that you're aiming to make through your VC firm. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more, be sure to click the subscribe button and follow us on all social media platforms as the Business Talk Library.